Have you ever loved someone so much that you started losing yourself just to keep them happy? You began apologizing for things that you didn't even do. Every argument somehow ended up in you saying sorry, even when, they were the ones that hurt you. Well, that's a narcissist tactic that destroys relationships from the inside out. And they'll make you believe that it's all your fault. But by the end of this video, you'll see through their illusions and take your power back for good. My name is Velasco, and on this channel, I give you real, no BS relationship advice. Now, if you're ready for raw truth where I tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, then hit that subscribe button and join this community of people who, choose peace over chaos and self-worth over toxicity. Because here, we don't chase love that confuses us. We attract love that respects us. Now, let's get back into today's video. Now, let me ask you something, and don't answer it yet. If a narcissist knows exactly what they're doing, why do they act like you're the crazy one? Now, hold on to that question. I'll answer it later in a bit. But I want you to keep it in your mind, because when you finally hear the truth behind it, well, you'll never look at another argument the same way again. See, most people think that narcissists destroy relationships by yelling, cheating, or lying. But I believe that they use something far more subtle. It's not physical, it's psychological. And it's called gaslighting, the silent assassin of self-worth. Gaslighting is when someone distorts your perception of reality, until you start doubting yourself instead of them. A narcissist doesn't need to break you by force. They break you by confusion. They twist the truth into fiction until, you can't tell what's real anymore. Now, why does this tactic work so well? Because it's not about intelligence. It's about emotion. Even, the smartest people fall for it, because a narcissist, it doesn't target your logic. They target your heart. They use love, as a leash. They know you care. They know you want peace, not war. So when they start, rewriting reality, your empathy, well, it becomes your weakness. A study from the University of Stockholm, well, we found that people who experience, emotional manipulation consistently, well, they underestimate how much abuse they've endured, because their sense of self-trust gets hijacked. That's what gaslighting does. It replaces your intuition with their narrative. Understand that gaslighting, it doesn't happen alone. It rides shotgun with something psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. Now, one day, they love bomb you. They tell you that you're their entire world, their soulmate, the best thing that's ever happened to them. The next day, they withdraw affection, ignore you, criticize you, and make you beg for the version of them that showed up yesterday. It's emotional gambling. One day you hit the jackpot and the next day you're bankrupt. But because you've tasted the high, you keep chasing it. You become addicted to their validation, like a slot machine that rarely pays out but keeps you pulling, their lever. That's not love. That's conditioning. Even the Bible warned about this kind of deception. Proverbs 26:24 says, "Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit." Now, that verse is psychology written before psychology even existed. The gaslighting is the devil's favorite trick. Hide a lie inside love and make you feel guilty for noticing it. You see, gaslighting, it doesn't just destroy relationships. It destroys identities. You start abandoning your boundaries just to avoid conflict. And one day you wake up and realize that you don't even know what you believe anymore. That's when they've won. Because when you stop, trusting yourself, they become your compass. And anyone who controls your reality controls your life. When Adam blamed Eve in Genesis, he was deflecting accountability. Narcissists, they do the same thing today. They play innocent while throwing you under the bus. They'll lie so convincingly that they start believing it themselves. And because, you're an empathetic person, you start wondering if maybe they're right. But let me tell you, you're not crazy. You're not heartbroken. You're just someone who loved deeply and got manipulated by someone who mistook love, for control. Narcissists, they don't chase people that they can't control. They chase people who reflect light. Your kindness, what threatens their insecurity. Your empathy exposes their emptiness. So they dim your light, hoping to make you forget how bright you were before they came along. But remember this, they can distort reality, but they can't delete it. The truth, well, it always resurfaces. And when it does, the peace that follows clarity is sacred. Now, when it comes to healing from a narcissist, you don't just heal by, reclaiming your mind. You're also reclaiming your God-given identity. So how do you outsmart Gaslighting. Well, you do it by anchoring yourself in truth, not their version of it. You do it by, reconnecting with your community, because isolation is a narcissist playground. You gotta surround yourself with people who remind you of who you were before manipulation try to, rewrite your story. And finally, lead on both God and logic. Pray for discernment, but also recognize the red flags that he's already shown you. Sometimes God's no is the protection that you keep trying to, turn into a maybe. Every time you choose clarity over chaos, peace over, people pleasing, you take another piece of your power back. You see, most people think that narcissists destroy you the day that they betray you, but that's not true. They destroy you the moment that you start doubting your own intuition. That's why that healing is so powerful, because every time that you trust yourself again, you undo the damage. You start realizing that the arguments you thought you lost were never meant to be won. They were meant to drain you. You start seeing that peace was never something that they could give. It was something that they keep stealing. You need to realize that narcissists, they don't want closure. They want access. They don't apologize to make peace. They apologize to reset control. Romans 12:19 says, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath." In other words, you don't have to expose them. The truth always exposes itself. Your job is to rebuild, to protect your peace, to rise, above the version of you that begged for the bare minimum and start walking the version of you that attracts abundance. You can forgive without reconnection. You can love without returning. You can heal without ever hearing, "I'm sorry." Because closure, it's not something that they give. It's something that you create by choosing yourself. So remember the question from the beginning: if a narcissist knows what they're doing, why do they act like you're the crazy one? Well, I believe it's because the moment that you start questioning your own sanity, they've already won. They act like you're crazy so they don't have to face the reality of their own behavior. It's projection, pure and simple. They can't handle guilt, so they hand it to you like a hot potato. But you're done catching what doesn't belong to you. You're not crazy. You're just someone who gave love to the wrong person and learned the right lesson. God doesn't expose people to shame you. He exposes them to free you. Sometimes he lets the mask slip, not so you'll fix them, but so you'll finally see them. Stop praying for the relationships, to go back to how the way they used to be. Start praying for the strength to never settle for it again. Your peace is not negotiable. Your clarity is not up for debate. And your worth, well, it was never meant to be decided by someone too blind to see it. So the day that you stop chasing their version of love is the day that you start walking in God's version of freedom. If this video spoke to you, don't just click away. Rewatch it whenever you start doubting yourself again. And if you're serious about healing from a narcissist or from a cheating partner, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning. We're building a movement of people who refuse to let manipulation win, because peace isn't a luxury. It's your birthright. My name is Velasco, and remember this: you don't heal by proving your worth to the wrong person. You heal by remembering you were worthy the whole time.